Okay, looks like we're live. We're about ready to get started with this wonderful webinar. Welcome to all those of you who have logged on early. Thank you for being early and reserving your spot. We're going to get started here in about 1 to 2 minutes. We'd like to quickly do a short AV check and make sure that you can both hear us clearly as well as see the first slide. So you should see on your screen right now the welcome slide, the picture of Carol, and you should be able to hear me clearly. If you could jump over onto the right side of your screen into the chat box and let us know if you can hear and see clearly, then we'll go ahead and get started in about 1 to 2 minutes. Thank you. Okay, it looks like everyone can hear us clearly as well as see the slides. Everything's working correctly. So Carol, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to you.
Okay, thanks Tyler, and hello. Thank you for attending this Cavallo webinar. I'm Carol Herder. Last time I checked, we had 864 registrants. Some of you are back again as a result of the success of the past ones you've attended. And I trust you'll find this one as informative and interesting. And a hearty welcome to all new attendees. You can use the chat box on the right to ask any questions and just submit them when you think of them. And we'll address them at the end, but likely we'll not be able to get all of them answered. Sorry, 900 people asking questions might be a bit difficult. Lately, we've been hearing some grumblings about this or that farrier or this or that veterinarian. Sometimes it's so easy to point fingers and blame. It's important for us to realize that we all have to start somewhere. And I don't believe that any farrier or vet ever started out with any intention other than to help. Even our esteemed Dr. Teskey originally started out nailing metal shoes onto horses' feet. He learned to shoe horses as part of normal ranching duties and conventional veterinary care. Now, thankfully, he's changed his focus, and with that is developing equine management programs that nurture a happy horse partnership. For Dr. Teskey, this now does not include the practice of shoeing with metal and nails. It's called evolution. We learn more, and we change, and we develop, and we grow. You'll be given some amazing information here today. The uncanny thing is that we hear information when we're ready to. And in that regard, it may be something we've heard time and again before, but really hadn't been prepared to grasp it. So finally the shoe drops and we get it. Well, I hope there's something that impacts you on that level today. You most likely have a lot of good information already, but if you learn even one more thing here today, it'll bring you closer to a better life for your horse. Dr. Tomas Teskey is the oldest of 5 siblings in a 6th-generation ranching family. Wow. He received a bachelor's degree in botany from Northern Arizona University in 1991 and a doctor of veterinary medicine degree from Colorado State University in 1995. He has practiced large animal medicine and surgery in Arizona since graduation, with the majority of his work focused on horses. So taking a special interest in equine podiatry since 2001, he became a passionate supporter of the barefoot performance horse, and he published The Unfettered Hoof, a paradigm change for equine podiatry, in the Journal of Equine Veterinary Science in February 2005. This sparked greater attention, discussion, and interest within the veterinary community about the benefits of a more holistic and natural approach to hoof care versus the more antagonistic approaches of conventional farriery. Numerous other articles have continued to explore these not really so new ideas. Applying the principle of holistic hoof care to horses, he's learned valuable on-the-ground lessons from the horses themselves, which now enjoy greater soundness and vitality, working in the same rough Western terrain as previous generations. With superior health and soundness as a goal, he's a leading veterinarian authority on the equine hoof and barefoot performance horse, is dedicated to continuing research in hoof care, and is happiest supporting horse owners in their efforts to achieve honest soundness by holding lectures and workshops on horses and hoof care worldwide, which is what we're doing here today. And I'm most heartened by Dr. Teskey's, I want to say, valor in his recent professional plea, imploring his veterinarian colleagues to learn of the information that follows in this webinar. And here's just a small excerpt of what he asked his colleagues. I implore all veterinarians to learn much about the better ways we have of truly protecting horses' feet with alternatives to steel shoes. The natural trim based upon the rediscovered and continually improving understanding of the workings of the equine foot, and a myriad of different hoof boot designs with more coming all the time. Boots allow a horse's feet to have vital mechanism with every step and can completely protect the feet. It's really hard for me to even fathom using a steel shoe at all because these devices are simply not offering anything beneficial to a horse, only harm. We can't continue to apply them and feel good about it. Wonderful. So, on behalf of me, Carol, and the team at Cavallo, we're very proud to bring you this profound information through the knowledge, skill, and expertise of Dr. Tomas Teskey.
Well, thank you for that introduction, Carol. That was a lot to live up to. I am really glad to be here, and it's been an adventure for sure. And I really like the way you say that, you know, it's not just about me, it's about farriers and horse owners and everybody else. And I always encourage everybody to make this information their own. You don't need to believe me. People don't need to believe you or their farrier. This is something that we can all get our hearts and minds around and really just test out whether or not it feels right in our gut, in our heart. And so if some of this information makes sense to you and you want to know more, all you got to do is use that internet. There's just 100,000 hits that comes up anymore when we look at natural hoof care or barefoot hoof care on the computer. So the information is out there, and this is just going to be a very small sampling of some of the important stuff that I wanted to share.
Well, that's perfect. Thank you so much. And it is indeed a journey that we're all happy to take, because that's why we're here tonight.
So on my screen, I am not seeing the big picture of the slide yet. I see my first slide of the veterinary oath under Tyler's icon. Maybe if I click on that, yeah, and it comes up.
Yeah.
So I threw this slide in there just because I am a veterinarian, and I did learn some specific things, and I also agreed to some things besides just helping animals and reducing suffering and helping the public health. The biggest thing is that I have this obligation that I agreed to improve my own knowledge and pass it on. And this is why we're here. This is what we're doing. We're we're continuing to come up with so many cool things about how the horse lives and how the feet work for the horse. And so that's just why I threw that up there, so that I can let you know that my agenda, if there is one, is to just pass on this knowledge about what I've learned. So the next slide should be something that we want to just talk about again. Ultimately, each horse owner is responsible. Don't put this responsibility on your veterinarian or your farrier, at least not ultimately. I know there's a lot of farriers and veterinarians out there who are not up to speed on this, and I encourage them to do their continuing education to keep up with this, and at least offer this as an option for people. To not offer a more natural hoof care approach to people who are looking for answers for their horses is leaving out a very important part of our responsibility as a veterinarian. It's our responsibility to let people know what their options are. And another part of my agenda is to just help you have the healthiest horse possible by giving you the big picture. We're not just talking about feet. We're not just talking about horses' teeth or their gut, but we're talking about their social nature and how they evolved, and how can we be respectful of how they evolved. Because if we know that horses evolved eating grass and being in a herd-based structure, and we're not providing that for them in our environment, that is very disconnecting and causes disease in these animals. It's pretty straightforward. There's things they need, like space to run and move, and so many horses are confined so tightly that they can't even get themselves up to a run. And this is a problem. You know, minimum space requirements for a horse ought to be quite large, for example. And the diet should be grass-based, and they should be with others of their kind, because they are hardwired to be herd animals. And once we get our hearts and minds around this, we start to be able to make those choices that weren't available before. I have no judgment around the way somebody keeps a horse if they are not aware of what's going on. So this is truly about empowering you as a horse owner to see the choices you have. So let's go on to the next slide and see where we can start with talking about how we're handling our horses. And you all are probably really aware of natural horsemanship, and you talk about talking the horse's language, right? You want to speak the horse's language as much as you can, so that they're not confused, so that they're not stressed, so that they can perform to the best of their ability, so that they can perform like a horse. So we use techniques and we use philosophies to get along with horses, and these have come out of a foundation of learning from whence they came. So we're going to be part of their world and have them around us. It makes a lot of sense to me to try to speak their language, because we care about them. We want them to be healthy. When they're healthy and happy, we feel that and we want that, and our relationship with them becomes much better. So what else do we have beyond that slide there? I started looking at horses that trim themselves. So I might refer to a feral horse, a wild horse, a BLM Mustang, or I might refer to some of my own horses, because they look exactly the same. They are self-trimming. Why? Because of the movement and the mileage that they put on I have horses on the ranch that I have not trimmed in 10 years. And I'm going to show you some of the pictures of their feet. So this is a model for looking at hooves and horses, and I'm just going to pass on some of the ideas I have about attaining that. Offer as much space as you possibly can. Horses in stalls are horses that are dying in many respects, with respect to their psyche, their gut health, their respiratory health, their hoof health. I can't think of a single thing that is beneficial to a horse's overall health to be confined in a stall. That doesn't mean they can't have one, but I believe they should have free access in and out of the stall. And I also believe in riding more and trimming less. Most people don't use their horses to the degree that they are able to be used. But there's a picture of me with my horse on top of the mountain, and there's a picture of his hoof on that day, and that hoof has not been touched by a tool in years. And yet it almost looks like you can see where I might have taken a rasp or a hoof knife, but I can assure you that that hoof has not been touched by tools. That hoof has been shaped by the earth itself.
So this is all from the amount of movement.
Yep, a movement over terrain that is stimulating and of a varied nature. Some rocky, some soft, some wet, some dry. And as long as my horses get to navigate on that kind of ground, that varied terrain throughout the year, they stay self-trimming. Now I have some softer areas, softer pastures that are telling me that they're not wearing their feet quite as fast, but I leave them alone because I know they're going to be going to a rougher area soon. And what this has taught me, that in captivity, when our horses' feet need to be trimmed because they're not able to self-trim completely, I have really good ideas about what that shape should be, because that proper shape leads to a predictable, good feeling function for these horses. And this is all without overdoing it. I'm real adamant about trimmer or farrier not over trimming. And I'll get into that a little bit more and why later. But let's look at the next slide and see what else we have with regards to this self-trimming idea. When horses are born, you may have seen them, they have this soft covering on their feet, but it doesn't last for more than literally minutes to an hour, because baby horses love to get up on their feet immediately, if not sooner. I've seen mares of my own give birth and babies trying to get up on their front feet before they're even completely outside the mare. This is an adaptation for survival. So a mare giving birth in a certain area has a deep and innate desire to get away from where she just gave birth. And what do? We confine them to a stall, and they have to stay in that stall with that blood and that afterbirth. And some of these mares have a real psychological issue with that. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of babies trampled or hurt by mares who were just trying to follow their nature and get away from this dangerous area, because 50 million years of evolution, those predators are coming. Everything eats a horse. The only thing a horse eats is the grass. So this is hardwired for these babies to get up on their feet and get out of that area with mom before they even nurse. That is not the first order of business for a baby. The first order of business is to get up and move. And this is a critical time for them to start developing good hoof structure. These babies that in confinement and domestication spend way too much time on shavings or straw or too soft of a ground. So I'm going to really ask you to think about what would it be like for babies to be born where they can get up and move on firm ground to start the development of their internal structures and start shaping their feet right as they're born. I'm telling you, it would be magical. We would prevent 95% of the hoof deformities and the hoof problems that we see if our babies were given the chance to move right as they were born. Next slide. This is just what I referred to as nature being, you know, the driving pressure for why horses are shaped the way they are. What you see before you in your horse, the shape that they are, is there for a reason. It's there because it is a highly successful way to be shaped and move and form. Nothing you see about your horse is weak. Nothing you see about your horse is unable to handle the stresses of environment, the stresses of metabolism and different nutrition and different weather patterns. In fact, I've seen horses that I feel develop beyond the level of their feral predecessors. Look at some of these athletes and some of these horses going 100 miles in a day or less than a day. Some of these endurance horses. There's no feral horse that I know that goes that kind of distance in that short a time, and yet we have countless examples of especially Arabian horses that can do this. And in 2 days it looks like they could use a trim. I mean, this is phenomenal conditioning. This is phenomenal adaptation beyond what they have come from. This is a testament to their real ability. And I just wanted to pass that on to you. Not that you have to ask this of your horse, but just so that you know that if you have a horse, you have an amazingly adaptable creature that can do more than you know. So, next slide. Everything about a horse is movement. Talk to an artist. Talk to somebody who's in touch with that side of their brain, and they'll talk to you about the moving lines in the horse. And I'll talk to you about the forces that occur on the horse as they move across the landscape. As their hoof strikes the ground, that ground strikes back. So between the earth and the hoof itself, there is a marriage of interaction going on here. One shapes the other. I've had dreams of horses moving across the earth, leaving their hoof prints behind, and I've had visions of the earth turning underneath horses, and all they seem to have to do is lift their feet together. The pressure, the release, the concussion from the hoof, the dampening from the earth, the mileage that they go, and the wear and tear on their bodies and their hooves over time. Horses and their hooves are a sculpture in time. And there's ways that you can nurture this relationship between the horse and the earth. And there's ways that you can cut them off from the earth and antagonize millions of years of evolution. We haven't known horses for any length of time. We've known horses for less than the time it takes to snap your fingers compared to the amount of time if you were looking at a 24-hour period. Horses have been around for 23 hours, 59 minutes, and 50 seconds, and snap your fingers, and that represents the amount of time that humans have been around horses. So again, what you see is there from eons of adaptation, and they are my teachers, and this is the information that will help you keep them healthy. Let's look at the next slide and keep moving. There's some shapes I want to talk to you about. You look from the top down, you can see a hoof is wider at the bottom than it is at the top. They're not shaped like donkeys or mules. Donkeys and mules are different, and I'll show you some pictures later. And that middle picture is the bone inside that hoof, called the coffin bone. And it has the similar shape. It's narrower at the top and wider at the bottom for a wider base of support. And humans have copied this in their architecture. So over there on the right is a cone-shaped building. Very strong, very architecturally sound. Next slide talks about a dome, the shape of a dome inside a hoof. So look at the bottom of a coffin bone, and it's not flat. Or lay a straight edge across the bottom of a hoof and see that it is concave, so that there's a dome. And there's another copycat thing that we humans did. We make a superdome, and it's a very sound architectural structure. And then the third slide in this series is talking about triangles. There are some triangles to be seen. On the side view of that coffin bone, you see that point. And then down low on the right, you see that cut section of the coffin bone. Look at that triangle on that cut section. And then look at the picture of the bottom of the hoof again. We have the big frog, which is triangular shaped, and then we have triangles facing the other direction in the bar heel area. And so architects use triangles for dynamic strength. Architect will tell you that bridges and skyscrapers need to be able to move. They're not built to be rigid. What happens if they were built rigid? They would fracture and break and fall. There is a built-in dynamic structure to architectural buildings, bridges, and so it goes with the hoof. Everything about the hoof is plastic or dynamic or moving. Very important. Next slide. I made up a little acronym for you, and maybe this will help you talk about this with all of your horse friends, or talk about it with your horse if you don't have anybody who thinks you're sane anymore. That's okay. They're great listeners. P stands for protection. Hooves protect a horse from stuff in their environment. There's brush, and there's rocks, and there's other hooves, and there's hot and cold. And this is the picture of that same horse again of mine, and so rounded, so polished. I mean, this horse moves a lot and carries me many miles, and I don't need to trim this horse. But if I did, I would have a pretty good idea what a good shape is, so I could use my rasp or use my tools to mimic this shape to a certain degree, if I left enough on there for him to wear off. Next slide talks about the A in PACES, which stands for adjusting architecture. Because the world isn't flat. Used to think it was, didn't we? Oh, that was something else. No. You know, you're going along a side hill, or you're turning a corner, and you can watch a hoof roll from side to side. So a hoof was designed to be able to move and flex according to the terrain for a good base of support. It conforms to the terrain. It offers a secure grip and safety. The next slide is probably more on architecture because it's a pretty big category. If you look at the bones and how they line up, look at how they fit like a lock and key. This is the bones in the lower limb from the ankle down. Long pastern bone, short pastern bone, navicular bone, and coffin bone. And look on the right how those joint surfaces marry up just perfectly. The movement is front to back, not side to side. You can't take a horse's limb and move these bones side to side more than a quarter of a degree. So what needs to move? I'll just bait you with a little question there. You already probably have an idea. The hoof is there for a reason, because these bones go front to back only. Let's look at the next slide and see what else about this architecture is cool. Inside, this is an inside view of the coffin bone, and then a blown up slide on the right with these little fin-like structures that look like gills. And this is an area of attachment between the hoof and that coffin bone. On the surface of the coffin bone is a fleshy covering called the corium. Very, very blood-rich. I'll show you a picture of that in a sec. But those epidermal lamina there interdigitate with the skin side from the coffin bone, and the surface area of this attachment is, in a normal-sized 1,000-pound horse, 9 to 10 square feet of attachment in an area the size of a man's big fist. That's an incredible adaptation. And what's cool about it is it allows for movement. It allows the hoof to twist. It allows the hoof to flex. It's not a hard and fast connection. It's a dynamic connection. So, very strong. A healthy hoof, it's very hard to get it off. In this next slide, I'm just going to give you the answer. It's the hoof capsule that needs to work for the horse. It absorbs the concussion and the torque. One heel up, one heel down. It's independent rear suspension. Hooves are able to do this. Hooves are able to flex in all directions, front to back, side to side, up and down, and over time. And this has been the structure that they have achieved because of millions of years of testing by nature. So I assure you, it's right. It's a good one. Next one. Maybe we're getting to the C here. Ah, yes. This is a picture of a hoof from a dead horse, a cadaver hoof, showing that blood-rich covering on that coffin bone called the corium, with a big circumflex artery at the bottom of that. So that retrotubular structure is the artery that goes around the tip of the coffin bone. One thing cool we learned about circulation is blood not only is there to bring the nutrients to the hoof and take away the waste products, but there's so much blood in the hoof when it lands on the earth that the blood itself acts as a shock absorber, a hydraulic shock absorber. And if you're interested in that, and you're kind of geeky like me and want to learn more about the hydraulics of the hoof, look up Dr. Bowker. Fascinating information about what's being learned here. Blood as hydraulic fluid. It's very cool. And see what I have next there. E stands for exfoliation in paces. This is a function of the hoof. This is important. A function of the hoof is to exfoliate itself. So if we're trimming and we're taking off too much and not leaving something for the horse to do, we have taken away a vital function of the hoof. Why? Because it is that exfoliation process which drives the next appropriate growth for where that horse finds itself on the earth. If it's on the soft ground, wet ground, hard ground, sandy ground, rocky ground, I don't care. It is adaptable, and it knows what to do by the way it's being exfoliated. It's that pressure that drives the new growth. I hope that makes sense. Exfoliation as a function of the hoof. It shapes itself if given the opportunity. S stands for sensation. There are thousands of nerve endings in a hoof. Thousands. They know where their hoof is. They can tell you where their hoof is in space if you listen. So when they take that little step your direction and land right on your foot, they know. Believe me, they know. And this is their sure-footedness. They feel the ground. They can see if it's safe. I'm committing my life to this step. I mean, if I take a misstep and become crippled, I'm food for the cave bear, for the saber-toothed tiger, for the wolf. I can't afford missteps. Proprioception is a fancy word for knowing where your foot is in space. If a horse wants to put their foot right in your face, they can do it, and do it quickly. If they're only kicking in your direction and miss you, they meant to miss. They know where their feet are. You can't beat the traction of a barefoot hoof either. And what's cool is if you allow your horses to shape their feet on certain terrains, you'll be able to perform on those terrains the best. So hooves in a wet environment look very different from hooves in an environment where I live. Look at some of these pictures now. These are very cool. I hope you dream about what some of these hooves are looking like. You've seen this guy before, but these are all self-trimming hooves. Keep in mind, I have not touched a tool to these hooves. So this is a dry environment, shaping that hoof. Let's look at the next one because we've kind of seen this guy already. This mare here, oh my goodness. This mare will take you wherever you want to go, as fast as you want to go, over as rough a ground as you can find, and with pleasure, and ask for more. Look at the thickness of the wall all the way around from the heel to the heel. Look at the calloused sole. Look at the depth of the grooves alongside the frog, all the way around the tip of the frog. Look at how massive and strong the bars are. So if you follow the hoof wall around to the heel, and then you go alongside the frog and you see that ridge of material, we call that the bar. Those bars extend almost clear to the tip of the frog. And this is absolutely correct for this mare. If you were to come in there and think that you were going to dictate a shape or say that those bars were too proud or too long, you would hurt this horse. I learned so much from these horses, and if the wet comes or the rain comes, then things change. Then I've learned to be a good meteorologist as a trimmer. If I know the raining time is coming, I back off. If I know it's going to be dry, I know I can trim a certain way. And look at the nice cone shape from the top to the bottom on that right-hand picture. A very smooth surface and a very rounded surface towards the ground. Let's look at another one, see what else we have. Now this horse was shod earlier in his life. So the bottom kind of has a funky shape. Kind of looks less round, right? And I can see more chipping that has occurred along the edges. And on that rear view I can see a little bit of a crease that comes up into that what we call the central sulcus, because he has some degree of hoof contraction. The hoof from the shoeing and from previous confinement caused his hooves not to be as big as they would have been had he not been confined to a pen or kept in shoes long term. So horses end up with smaller feet and what I call contracted feet if we don't allow them to move or if we shoe them because of the rigidness of the steel, not allowing the hoof to move. Now, this horse can do a pretty good amount of work on rough terrain, but not like the previous one. His level of performance is compromised. So if I'm going to use this horse, I might need to put some boots on him if I'm going to use him more than a couple of days. Next one. Here is a very, very contracted frog. Okay, look how tiny that frog is. Look in that right-hand picture. There's my thumb above the heel bulbs for reference. And look how wide that frog is. I mean, that frog is so tiny. It has basically been snuffed out of use and existence, and yet I want to show you something that's going on here with this hoof. The walls are also thin on that left-hand picture. Out from the edge of the sole, there's not much thickness of wall. But what this gelding has is a massively thick sole. If you look at that picture on the right and the crack that comes down on either side of the frog, that is an inch deep. So if I were to take this hoof off of this horse, it would nearly be an inch thick. So there is some amazing compensation of a horse that is badly damaged from shoeing, badly damaged from confinement and mismanagement, and yet he runs around with my herd and is pretty successful. He actually moves a little stiffly, but his ears are up and he's happy and he's good weight and he is compensated in a way. So what I'm saying is horses compensate and adapt once they go to being barefoot from being shod. Next slide. This is a Morgan gelding that's just a wild man. I rode this horse for a while, and I would put him in boots because we were in some pretty rough spots, and I remember specifically one day saying, "Hold up here, guy. You're out of your mind. You're just unbelievably confident of these rocks with these boots on." I took his boots off because I felt like he needed to pay attention a little bit more and pay attention to me. So what I'm saying is I've had the privilege of riding and using some of these horses that were previously shod over the same trails, over the same mountains, through the same canyons, pushing the same cows, moving the same herd of horses without shoes, with their own feet, and I'm telling you, it's been a pleasure. It's look how rounded this horse's heel bulbs are, and the shape of that frog, and how wide it is towards the rear, and how rounded all the surface area is. There's nothing sharp, there's nothing flat here anywhere. Next slide. This is a mare that has a little bit less quality to her hoof, I think. And it's a little hard to see, but on that right-hand picture I was trying to show how the frog is down between the heels a little bit. And this is a protective mechanism. When it gets really dry and really hard, I see these horses' frogs receding a little bit down between the heels. And this is how they're protecting the sensitive part of their foot. And it's an adaptation, and I don't interfere with that. In other words, I'm not going to come in there with my rasp and take those heels down. Next one, I think, is of the same mare, and I was getting a little artistic. Oh yeah, see, I got a picture of the ground here, showing the cracks in the ground, and that reminded me of the cracks in this hoof. That takes me back to my introduction, you know. There's this marriage between the horse's hoof and the earth. You know, the ground gets dry, the hoof gets dry. You can actually do things in your environment to help mitigate this, because those cracks in that hoof hurt. I've seen that mare be a little bit off when she gets cracks like this. But she gets through it, and it doesn't get her down for long. If I was confining her, or if I did have her in my smaller pasture at home, then I would provide an area where she could get some moisture. Maybe she'd like to play in the trough. Maybe she'd like to play in the pond or a wet spot somewhere. Next slide. Here's a founder case that I had. And I just wanted to point out, look at all that material towards the front of that toe. Looks like deposits of cauliflower all around there. This is a foundered horse, which I'll talk about more in a little bit, that has helped himself and put down material. And what I've learned about taking care of these horses is that you just take care of the heel height, and you bring the toe back so they don't have a long fingernail, and they do the rest. They know how to heel. Next one. For you donkey and mule lovers out there, that's a donkey on the right and a mule on the left. They have a totally different strategy. They evolved on the rocks. They evolved to stop and kick you and bite you instead of running away from you or camouflaging themselves in the rocks. They don't necessarily run away. I'm talking about donkeys, because the mule is more of a human thing, where we hybridized the donkey and the horse. But there's advantages to this in rougher environment. So if you have donkeys and mules, give them rocks. Definitely give them a pile of rocks. They will love you to death, and they will be on those rocks playing King of the Mountain, and they love it. Next one. Here's a quick example of what it might look like to do a natural trim. So here's a mare that has not moved enough to finish this trim. She's broken her quarters out. The quarters are what we call the sides of the hoof. But her heels are long and her toe is long. So the next slide just shows how I tried to finish what she started without overdoing it. What would her foot look like if she had the opportunity to put on some miles? Well, maybe it would look a little bit like that. But look at what I left. See the dry material in her sole, the crackly dry material that's still there? Remember, E is for exfoliation. A function of the hoof is to exfoliate. If I do everything for her, I have done a disservice. Always leave something for the horse to do on their own. Next one. Okay, so I'm going to show you some kind of ugly stuff, some stuff that can happen, and I get to see some pretty ugly stuff. And the cool thing about natural hoof care is that it can describe what is happening and fix it. Whereas the paradigm of the steel shoe and the farriery does a pretty good job describing what happens and a very poor job at fixing it. And what we see as an epidemic in our shod horses is small contracted feet with very weak soft tissue, very thin hoof walls. The coffin bone itself becomes osteoporotic, meaning it gets moth-eaten, it loses bone density. And infection is much more common in shod hooves because the hoof can't breathe, and it leaves really areas without air that certain bacteria love to live. And you know what that smells like because the dogs start coming around whenever you pull the shoes off, right? Next slide. So shoes don't really protect what's going on. They add to the concussion. If you want to look up Dr. Bean's study back in '83, he determined that a horse that was shod, that was trotting, versus a horse that was not shod, that was just walking, massive difference in concussion. Steel is very transmittive of concussive forces, so much so that it causes bone changes all the way up the horse's leg. And I think it affects the way they handle their whole body. And I can feel it when I ride them. I've ridden enough barefoot horses that when I ride a shod horse, I can feel it. Next one. Sometimes when you take off shoes and pads, you see some pretty ugly stuff where it had been infected, and this material just falls out. It just abscessed out because the bacteria and fungus were having a big party underneath that shoe or underneath that pad. This is just not necessary. We have ways of protecting the hoof without leaving it vulnerable to these kinds of bacteria and fungus. Next one. What about the way the hoof moves? I want you to dream about this one too. I want you to look at that picture on the left and see how open and broad and voluptuous those heels are. I mean, wow. Versus that on the right. Cleavage is not good between horses' heel bulbs like that, okay? Cleavage may be good some other places, but it's not good on that situation on the right. The cartilage and the soft tissue inside becomes uplifted, okay? And the shoe prevents that soft tissue from doing its job, from dampening concussion, from protecting the horse. You may have noticed that steel is rigid. It doesn't flex, and it doesn't torque one side up and one side down. And the horse's hoof does. So let's use some materials that allow the hoof to work instead of something rigid. Now again, I'm not blaming the use of that. I'm just saying it's an inappropriate material. It was the best thing going 1,000 years ago. Oh boy, it was the plastic of the day. But what do we have today? Plastics, dynamic materials, rubberized materials. Let's think about using that. Next slide. What I did was I dissected a sole off of a horse's limb, a horse that had died, and I looked at the structures inside, and I used, and this is just a video capture of that, And if you try to move this side to side, it doesn't move. And if you look at the next slide, I did a video capture from the other foot off of the same horse without the shoe on there, and I could flex it side to side, and you could see one side up, one side down very easily. You know, with our strength in our hands versus the 1,000 pounds of the horse, we could actually move this and see how it worked. It was very cool. And if you come to one of my clinics, I will show you firsthand. Next one, I think, is showing this same sole inside of a boot that I cut apart, just to show how it could still work inside of material that was bendable, flexible, movable, material that complemented the natural ability of the hoof to flex and move. Next one. Sometimes when you take a shoe off, you'll see bruising, right? Well, is that stone bruising? No, it's not. What's happening is the hoof is held in a vaulted position against the coffin bone right above it, and if the hoof can't flex to get away from that concussive blow of the coffin bone above, it causes bruising. That diffuse bruising that you see towards the toe, that reddish hue all around the toe there, is coming from inside where the coffin bone is coming down on the sole that is not able to flex and move and get out of the way. Either that or being on top of a shoe that's very hard and concussive, or on top of hard ground. You can see this too. But it's a function of the hoof not yielding. A hoof needs to be able to yield to the hoof, or a hoof needs to be able to yield to the earth, rather. It's not a block of wood. It moves. Next one. I wanted to dispel just a quick rumor that I really loathe. I just wanted to let you know that there are no magnetic or physiologic phenomena that encourage a hoof to grow towards steel. So I understand that the farrier wants to encourage this heel to come out by leaving that shoe wider in the heel, but it never happens, okay? Shoes do not attract hoof growth towards them. There is no phenomena that occurs there. I can tell you how to correct this problem using a trim and using boots if necessary, and actually give you a nice result. That's beyond the scope of this right now, but we do that with regularity. We get better heel growth that's not so underrun in horses that are allowed to use their hooves naturally. Next one. Circulation is badly affected. This is a pretty phenomenal picture. This is taken with an infrared camera, a camera that takes a picture from heat. Okay, the camera picks up heat. So wherever you see the horse's legs in that picture is where the heat is coming off the legs. And there's not enough heat coming off of that right front leg from the knee down because that one has a steel shoe on it. Now obviously there's still blood getting to that hoof, otherwise it would fall off. But what I'm telling you is it's decreased. How much? We feel anywhere from 20 to 40% loss of circulation when a hoof is shod. And that has, look how it's happening in the entire lower limb. Interesting. Next one. Okay, the picture on the left, broader coffin bone. The picture on the right, a narrower coffin bone. The next smaller bone is the navicular bone. Look at the space to either side of the navicular bone on the left versus the space on the right. This is where blood vessels live. This is where nerves live. This is where soft tissue that has lots of nerve endings live. So that is a shod horse on the right and a barefoot horse on the left. That's better on the left and deformed on the right. because look at the loss of space for those nerves and blood vessels and lymphatics to bring circulation and take circulation away, bring nerve sensation to and from. This is bone contraction, and if you get to this point, you're looking at a serious problem. You want to prevent this, believe me. I can reverse this to some degree, but you want to be preventing this. Next slide. Here's that picture of the cleavage again, just to reiterate. That's structures that are going away and curling up. You know, if you don't use it, you lose it. And that's a picture of the capsule with about where the navicular bone lives. So what if I bring the heels of that hoof in? Can you see how the sides of the hoof would start to press on the ends of that navicular bone? So what would we need to do to help horses with navicular pain or heel pain? What would need to happen for a horse to be more comfortable if their hoof was contracting and hitting on the ends of their navicular bone? Next. When a hoof grows with a shoe on it, it elongates and gets very out of balance because there's no exfoliation, obviously. So you have huge, big layers that come off, you know, when you go to trim the horse. Now, obviously, this is pretty neglectful, left way too long, but it really illustrates how narrow the frog is getting and how the hoof is growing oblong instead of round. So shoes train a horse's hoof to become oblong and deformed. It's a deformity, and we get used to looking at it. And it's not normal, and it's not healthy, and there's a better way. We don't have to put up with deformities when we know what's causing them. Next. More on hoof contraction. You know, here's some little casts that were taken by Dr. Bowker just 6 weeks after removing shoes from a horse. And look at the size difference in that frog impression. And that's just in 6 weeks. And that the only change was taking the shoes off of that horse. So look how dynamic, look how plastic that hoof is and how it responds to being allowed to flex and move. You take the shoes off, you get a better form. You get a bigger hoof, a wider base of support, more normal circulation, better sensation. It starts to shape itself. You don't have to do as much work. It works for the horse, and if the horse is safe, you're safe. On and on and on. Next. Under pathology or disease, you know, there's not a single case of conventional farrier or veterinary medicine that says that they have cured navicular problems, and yet I can show you case study after case study that we have. And these horses are not only not in egg bar shoes, not in wedge pads, not in impression material, not in orthotics. They are on their own feet, and they are sound. And that is a testament to this paradigm with respecting the horse. That special shoe down there causes a horse to trot off sound simply because he's no longer bobbing his head up and down, simply because we're not looking at the big picture. We're ignoring what's going on inside the hoof, and the problems continue to get more and more and more, so that next year we're thinking of something else to try, when we could have just said, hold on, let's back up a little bit here. Let's fix this problem. Let's decontract this hoof. Let's get this hoof form better. That is how you cure horses with navicular problems and heel syndrome problems. You reshape the hoof. You allow it to re-expand. Next. Same with ring bone and and other things. If you look at that picture on the left, you see that swelling right above the hairline. That is extra bone formation laid down from a concussive injury, just and lack of torque being taken by the hoof. If the hoof can't take up the torque from the earth, it's going to pass off that responsibility to the next joint. Oh, the pastern joint. Wow. Where we see all the ring bone changes. And where do we see it in the rear? In the hocks, because of concussion. And for other reasons too, using horses too young and doing things with them that is abusive. But there's a way to prevent this. Take the shoes off, get the hoof working, and I've yet to see a horse that is a ring bone case not improve. They all improve because the hoof starts taking up the torque instead of passing it off to the pastern to do a job it was never intended to do. Next. I think this is a picture of side bone. This is soft tissue back here that's turned to bone. Why? Because of concussion and lack of movement. Cartilage has to move to stay alive. If you put your nose or ears in a cast and don't move it, your ear cartilage will turn to bone, or the tip of your nose will turn to bone. The other way is if somebody's punched you in the nose enough times or got you in a headlock enough times with your ears will turn and get little bony growths in them. Ask any wrestler that's been in headlocks for a long time. Their poor ears are very painful, and they have bone in the cartilage there. That's what's happening when we have what we call side bone. Again, take the shoes off, and I've got x-rays I can show you of side bone starting to dissolve. Not completely go away, but reduce. It's pretty cool. Next one. Another big category, laminitis, okay? I just wanted to show you this quick case study. What shoes are doing is causing loading from the earth on the periphery of the hoof, and it was not designed to work that way. Click that slide one more time and see if we get a picture or two to come up, or some more words. So this peripheral loading causes this shearing effect between the hoof wall and that soft tissue connection with the coffin bone. Okay, it's like me grabbing your long fingernail and pulling up on it. It's not going to feel too good. If I keep pulling up on it, I could pull your fingernail right off your finger, right? Not good. That's what's happening with shoes that are loading the periphery of the hoof. It's asking the hoof to work in a way it was not intended to. And so many more problems. We've already touched on the circulation and the mechanism. So if you look carefully enough, you can see evidence of this laminitis, this inflammation in all of these shod hooves. Why don't they all founder or lose the connection? Because horses are tough. Some are tougher than others. But it does set them up for a problem. This mare is a Swedish warm blood mare that they were ready to dig a hole and stick in the ground. I didn't need to x-ray this horse because I could see where her coffin bones, they were coming through the bottom of her hoof. This was a heart-wrenching case. I think there's one more picture here showing the hoof, Tyler. And so you can see the bone showing up in front of the frog. Okay? Lost connection. She lost the connection between her hoof capsule and the bone. Why? Because she was misdiagnosed and she was given drugs that were toxic to her system, and she was mismanaged with shoes. She was actually put in heel wedges to make her heels even higher, and she just couldn't hang on anymore. So she lost the connection, and this happened in all 4 feet because it ended up being a toxic reaction in her whole body. The next slide shows some of the things I started to do to try to help her. Amazing horse. Here's the earlier x-rays showing how out of position those bones are. And if you're not familiar with x-rays, I apologize, but basically we want those bones to be in better alignment like they are on the lower pictures. And, this is just in 2 months. And heck, in 2 months, she ended up on the ground and at the side of her grave with normal care. The normal veterinarians and normal farriers have given up on her. We can't do anything more. So here I come and try to do something, and I will tell you, it's just an amazing horse and an amazing owner. And I don't think I could do this with every horse, but she is a testament. The next slide. She's back on her feet. We've got her in homemade boots. I keep clicking there to bring more pictures. You can see the new growth coming down from the hairline and the old growth down low. Even where her cornet band was wounded and prolapsing, you can see where the new growth is. Look at the big hole in the front on that lower left picture where the material rotted out from where her coffin bone had protruded. This is just to show you what's possible. This is an extreme case. But we deal with laminitis and founder regularly, and we deal with heel problems and navicular problems regularly in our line of work, and we have a wild success. Way faster and way better than using shoes. Anybody who wants to challenge me to a little race to see how well a foundered horse comes around and how quickly, anytime we'll do it. I mean, I kind of hope we don't have to do it, but I'm telling you that it's phenomenal how these horses come around using boots and pads and proper diet and whatever movement they can handle, and not confining them to a stall, not shoeing them. Big difference. Next one. Just more of this horse named Cindy. She just did better and better. She's just got such a huge heart. You can see this old stuff growing down, and a couple more pictures there. Look at that. We've just almost got a completely new soul, and it doesn't look perfect, right? But look at her. She's up on her feet and she's going, and inspired her owner to paint that picture of her, and she's out of the darkness and into the light. And it's actually a famous artist in Tucson that had this horse. So very cool. Next one. And get finished up here because I'm rattling on. I firmly believe that our poor management and our use of rigid shoes are very much risk factors causing lameness in our horses, and they don't help the horses. They handicap them. They contribute to diseases that I can demonstrate to you. I can predict what's going to happen. I can measure what's happening. To my mind, a horse that has shoes on cannot be called sound to my eyes because I know too much. I know what they hide. I know what's happening. Okay? So they change the form and the function of the hoof so drastically that I simply cannot declare that horse sound, because sound to me has to do with form as well as function. And that's just me. Next one. So what is a sound horse? A sound horse is one that can comfortably walk, trot, and canter with pleasure, with an animation, with an alertness on their face, with a willingness to go, impulsion, on feet that are not covered up with a shoe that we know can cause these sorts of changes. Let me see a horse go on their own feet, and it doesn't have to be hard ground. It can be the turf or the sand or whatever. It doesn't matter. But they need to be able to feel their feet, because that's telling me what's going on for them. So if I do an examination for purchase, somebody's looking to buy a horse and the horse is shod, I tell them, hey, I can't tell what's going on here. You really ought to look at this. I warn them because shoes cover up a tremendous amount of information that the horse is trying to tell us. Next one. Again, just kind of some fun pictures of, out riding, out hunting with the hound dogs and going over logs. And some of these horses have boots. These horses are barefoot, even on these rocks, and doing great because they're conditioned for it. And these riders are safe. These horses are not going to abuse themselves. They're not going to misstep. They're not going to fall. Next. Use protection that complements the hoof. Use boots that flex with the hoof. There's more and more coming all the time. All kinds of designs coming. And the big thing is that we have different horses with different shaped hooves, and we have lots of different kinds of boots. And an experienced trimmer is going to help you find the right boot and help you fit it. Use the right pad. I'm a big fan of using pads in boots, even on sound horses, because the bottoms of these boots can be very hard plastic, and I think it's too hard in general to do a lot of miles on. I think we should be putting pads inside of most all of these boots. Next. So there was a veterinarian a while back named Bracy Clark. In fact, it was clear back to 1831, and he had this to say about shoeing horses, that he who first began this practice little suspected that he was laying the foundation of more animal suffering than ever it fell to the lot of one man to originate. And when I read that, I just dropped my whatever was in my mouth fell out, because here's a guy that was observing the world around him. You can read more about what he's written if you want to look him up. Wow, what an incredible amount of insight. And I guarantee you he was ridiculed right out of London, the University of London, but he knew what he knew, and he had a lot of conscience, and he wasn't afraid to say it. So I'm among friends, even if he's dead. Next. So, the facts are the facts, and I may be a poet and don't know it, but the shod and deformed foot is a sad and sorry sight, harmful to the horse, and the unfooted foot is a joy to behold and does no harm, of course. And I think I'm going to leave you with that. And
Aw.
Carol.
That's so nice. It's obvious you have so much more info you could be sharing with us. And, we'd love to get you back again. When I first saw your PowerPoint, I was really afraid that the scientific aspect of it would be a little bit beyond most of us. But, Dr. Teskey, you are able to explain these things nice and simply in a way that most of us can understand. So thank you for using layman terms for us. And, not all of us have the beauty and privilege of your lifestyle and land. And, if you're out there and you don't have the resources to make all of the changes you'd like to, it's okay. Do what you can and trust that the rest will unfold for you all. And, please don't beat yourself up. Just absorb this information as you can and take one day at a time. Change is so important. And I was reading the other day about trepanning, and they used to drill holes in people's skulls to let out the demons, and it was practiced for 10,000 years. And erectile dysfunction was treated by a transplant of goat testicles, and it led to, death and dismemberment and infection. And I could go on, But the point is, we now have this wealth of information available to us. And, one of the things we know now is that nailing metal into horses' feet is an outmoded and archaic practice. So we have a far better, more sustainable option, and I encourage you to take it. So, check out Cavallo. You know about us, and you can phone us toll-free. And, we have several more fabulous webinars planned as well. I think that we're out of time in terms of questions, so I'm just going to ask both Dr. Teskey and Tyler. Tyler, can we get these questions down, do you think? And Dr. Teskey, would you consider answering some of them by email?
Yeah, I get emails regularly from all over the world, and I like that. I like to help people with this, and if it's just some simple questions to get you lined out and give you some ideas on what to do in your limited environment, what you said is true. We have a lot of tips and tricks that work really well to achieve what we're talking about here in limited space. You don't need thousands of acres like I've got.
Yeah.
There are ways to do this in limited space, and you'll be happier because your horses are happier, and we'll go from there. So yeah, keep in touch, and if y'all would like to learn some more and give us good feedback, we'll do some more of this, and we'll see you then.
Okay, Dr. Teskey, thank you so much. It was really a pleasure.
Thank you, Carol.
Okay, bye-bye.